The invitation card on the table clearly states the time and location. On August 24, 2014, a group of troublemakers broke into the school. They also brought a lot of foods and candles to the classroom. The main character had an adorable face and a cute mushroom haircut named Can. The male lead, Do-Hoi, was the one who held the female lead's hands to help her climb over the wall into the school. Do-Hoi was passionate about basketball and had good academic performance, always ranked first top of his class. After bypassing 7 out of 49 cameras installed in every corner, Can and Do-Hoi finally came inside the classroom. Their purpose was to watch TV at school for free, but it was unfortunate when the school library suddenly malfunctioned and couldn't be accessed. At that time, Do-Hoi showed off his talent. Finally, the television operated normally. They just came here to watch the athletics competition of national team. Even though the security guard found out on the door, they still watched the whole game and cheered up. Until the competition ended, they started to rush quickly. The time went back to August 31, 2003. Due to the parents' divorce, Can was a beautiful female with normal academic performance. Can's greatest fortune was getting into Tran Hoa, one of the top high schools in the country. Despite her normal academic performance, she had a passion for photography. She often took photos to save unforgettable memories. When she walked to school, she suddenly fell into people's houses. She has tried to get the camera but she couldn't. Luckily, Do-Hoi appeared to help Can retrieve the camera and free her head from the window bars. Arriving at school, she saw the list and her name was placed next to Do-Hoi. They were really lucky to be seated at the same table by the teacher. Their names sounded like Can in the heart. After the class orientation, Can had a memorable meal at a restaurant with her parents. At dinner, Can happily shared the day's interesting events with her parents. Although she missed her mother and wanted to stay with her, she reluctantly said goodbye to her. The next morning, Can and Do-Hoi didn't wear uniforms to military class. Here they were both complained by the teacher. It turned out that when Can fell on Do-Hoi yesterday, they had swapped bags. So finally they had to go to the restroom together to make an exchange. Due to the bag mix-up, Can accidentally let the teacher confiscate Do-Hoi's megapixel 3 camera. Due to this, he held a grudge against her. Whenever they met each other, Do-Hoi reminded Can to get back the 3 megapixels for him. While hiding to find 3 megapixels for Do-Hoi, Can was caught by the teacher. And then she was constantly scolded and punished by her teacher. That night she was sad and wanted to call his mother to tell her about what she had encountered. But her mother told Can that she had been too busy and hang off. When Can was sad to come back her room, she saw Do-Hoi and his face was grilling figs. This is the first time Can has tried grilled figs but found it delicious. She wondered why some well-done students like them did such things as troublemaker students. Do-Hoi said that she was the type that he wanted to pursue. He wanted to get into Tan Hoa University and studied abroad in the US to become a physicist. After saying, they went to find more fruits to roast, which left him alone to tend the fire. Unfortunately, Can was caught by the teacher. Perhaps all her luck had been used up at high school. Finally, Can and Do-Hoi were fined for cleaning the garage. When working hard, Can suddenly sat down and cried out loud. When seeing her cry, Do-Hoi did something left for her. After cleaning up together, they sat together to listen to music and transcribe. Early in the morning, I heard the roar of a tiger through the loudspeaker. They didn't imagine that the teacher's military uniform had been hung on the flag by someone. The teacher's loud shout was intense that it woke Lo Tin-Ha up. Upon stepping outside, Lo Tin-Ha admitted she acted against the principles of impermanence. Lo Tin-Ha was a special student who loved Can. He was always by her side when she faced trouble. After 50 times for confessing, he was rejected by her every time. At that moment, the defense teacher wanted the whole class to arrange his handwriting, albeit a bit immaturely. Do-Hoi quickly helped, and with his knowledge of math and science, he organized everything in just an hour. At the end of the day, the class gathered together and sang happily. After being pinched, Do-Hoi felt all of Can's worries vanish. The next morning the whole class had to return to take the first-year assessment test. Everyone focused on the test, just Can couldn't do anything. After school, Can had to attend her father's blind date with a woman who would become her stepmother and had a child of her own. Can understood the situation and did nothing to add tension to the party. The next morning she went to school anxiously and worried that she might be expelled from school due to poor results. Hearing from seniors, she felt confident and happily entered the classroom. Due to the seat arrangements based on academic performance, she was placed the last. Her deskmate was a very loud girl. After just a few days of studying together, the girl had already crumpled Can's notebook. When the whole class submitted the homework, she was stunned and didn't know anything. It was due to the fact that her deskmate didn't tell Can about it. And of course Can was scolded harshly. Seeing her being bullied, Do-Hoi changed the seats and sat next to her. After school, her mother came to visit. But she didn't ask her and only said that she was too busy to take care of her. Can sadly informed that her father wanted to get married again. The next day Truong Jiao complained that her desk partners were bad students, and it led to arguments in the classroom. When Mr. Truong entered the classroom, she suggested switching seats, and Mr. Truong decided to compete with the whole class. If Du Haai won, the teacher would let everyone in the class change their seats. When the teacher and students were tied, Mr. Truong presented a challenging physics problem. If there was a person who could solve this, student side would win this game. Du Haai confidently stepped up to the podium, impressing everyone. Finally, the whole class was allowed to change seats freely. Du Haai decided to sit next to Can. Although he was seated at the back of the classroom, she still felt happy. After school, Can found her mother sitting at home. Her mother wanted to change Can's class since Mr. Truong had just graduated and lacked the teaching experience. When she disagreed, her mother became stern and insisted. She came here today to take down the couple's wedding photos. After finishing, she threw a key on the table and her attitude was indeed eye-opening. On this side, Tin Ha came to the class less than 3 minutes and set up a table at the end of class to sit alone. Seeing him being stubborn, the teacher didn't let him study in his own classroom. Hearing that, Lo Tin Ha immediately arrived at Can's class to study. He seemed to be a rude student. Sitting behind her, he kept teasing her. After that, the teacher asked Lo Tin Ha to a corner to teach him. He also told Mr. Truong to let Lo Tin Ha study with his class for a while. Mr. Truong also affirmed that he could teach Lo Tin Ha. After returning home from school, she was fed by his father with fish and coca to drink, and then asked him if he married a new wife. He still loved her as he was now or not. This young daughter was silly, wasn't she? Ancestors had taught that when parents divorce, children suffered the most. The next day Can went to school and asked for the school list. Seeing that Mr. Truong advised her to focus on studying. However, Can didn't have any dark intentions. After getting the school list, she happily informed him that Du Hao ranked the first in class, and the 15th level in the grade. Lo Tin Ha stole the list and immediately stood at the end of the class. When it was time to eat, she confided that she really wanted him to return to his class. Lo Tin Ha kept sitting behind her and teased her like that, making her unable to focus. In geography class, the teacher noticed Lo Tin Ha wasn't focused, so she called him up to return the paper. Although he didn't know anything, he stood up confidently and answered it. The teacher couldn't help laughing and forgave him. Du Haai stood up confidently and answered the teacher's question correctly, impressing the class. Lo Tin Ha stood up to oppose Du Haai. Lo Tin Ha presented a strong argument, but Du Haai wasn't backing down either. Seeing them arguing back and forth, she was confused. On the way back, Tin Ha gave her a picture when she chopped off her ears, which was lovely. The next day in class, Lo Tin Ha took Can's camera and invited her to take scenic photos. Lo Tin Ha took Can to a beautiful beach and captured the stunning scenery with the camera. Can happily enjoyed the picturesque scenery. Can casually remarked that the place suited her mood, prompting Tin Ha to take her to another location. On this side, Du Haai and her friends were worried that she was absent from class, the teacher would punish. On the beach, Can and Lo Tin Ha shouted loudly, expressing their feelings. They both had shared the same fear of studying and taking exams. Lo Tin Ha informed that she would pursue his dream on his own way. Lo Tin Ha took a few beautiful photos for Can again. During the meal everyone complimented Can for getting into Tran Hoa prestigious school. Everyone has a heart, Can also has a bowl of male fish dipping sauce. Seeing other compliments, she reluctantly accepted it herself. When she arrived at the film shop to buy for her camera, the owner informed her that they were sold out. A while later, Tin Ha returned the backpack to her and said goodbye to her. When opening it, she saw a lot of movies inside. On this side, Du Haai was also repairing the pen to help Can. The next morning, not seeing Tin Ha's desk, Can felt a little bit sad. Du Haai asked her where she had gone the previous day, but she smiled that she went to a special place. In the evening, looking at the photos Lo Tin Ha took, Can had to praise his talent. It turned out that his talent for taking photos was so great. The next day, Can arrived at school and saw a group of girls in beautiful outfits. When coming to a class, she realized that it was a basketball competition. Everyone was waiting for Du Haai to join in basketball competition and would receive other girls' love. Many girls would definitely bring him water. Can suggested taking photos of Du Haai, and the handsome boy agreed. Later, Mr. Fan called Tin Ha and Can to the office to assign them a task. Can's task was to take photos for the Japan tour group, while Tin Ha had to translate for the school since he had lived in Japan before. Since Mr. Fan had assigned her, Can missed the chance of taking Du Haai's photos. Upon hearing her, he felt angry. This time, she had to break her promise to him again. Seeing that she didn't watch him, Du Haai couldn't concentrate and let his teammates score. Can made an excuse of going to the restroom to sneak over and watch Du Haai play basketball. Can held a water bottle to give to Du Haai but saw him accepting water from someone else instead. The next day she listened to friends talking about the match. Can was regretful. She also sulked him since he received other's bottle of water instead of waiting for her. In the class, Du-Hai secretly wrote the letter to his classmate about the basketball game. Du-Hai was caught by Mr. Han and he was punished as a 3-year-old. In the second match, Du-Hai was much more emotional. After a while, Du-Hai sent the opponent's strikers to exercise and forgot the way back. At the end of the match, Du-Hai's team still won. When it was time to eat, Can came to sit next to Du-Hai again. He asked her if she could join with him in another match. But she didn't say anything. The next day, while Can took pictures for the school, her mind was on the basketball court. During the session, she kept checking the clock to see if the match was over yet. Finally she asked Mr. Fan for a 15-minute break to take photos of the basketball team. Seeing this, Mr. Fan immediately sent Lo Tin-ha to arrest her. Can wanted to give water to Du-Hai, but before she could give it to him, Tin-ha robbed it. After returning to the office, despite Mr. Fan's scolding and tired mouth, Can still left it in his hands. Taking photos for the Japanese tour group was anyone's business, not hers. When he got home, he saw his younger brother playing her plane. She felt angry. This was a birthday present her parents gave her when she was 10, so no one can touch it. She didn't scold the boy but went back to room and called her mom to cry. But her mother didn't care anymore and she just advised her to focus on studying. The next day, when Can took the film, she panicked to find that the photos she had taken for the school turned out poorly. But the photo that she took of Du-Hai was outstanding. Finding no way, she came to seek help from Lo Tin-ha. It was clear that Tin-ha would not agree to help her. Back in class, she was sulking about Du-Hai receiving water from someone else. Seeing that, he could reluctantly apologize to his desk mate. On the final day of basketball competition, he still had to carry the body to take photos for school. Finding no ways, she took the mic to announce the Japanese tour that a basketball game was happening outside. Hearing that, the Japanese tour group also wanted to hear it. Tin-ha teamed up with Can to lead the group to the basketball court to cheer for everyone. During the competition, he unfortunately fell down and Can took him to the infirmary. Seeing no one around, Can also showed Du-Hai some photos she had taken. Du-Hai praised her for being talented and rubbed her head with his hand. Until now, she also had a feeling for him and no longer hated him like the first day they met. Can complained that Mr. Fan always had her taking photos, leaving her no time for homework. Seeing so much homework, she was burnt out since she couldn't finish these assignments. Du-Hai also reminded her not to play with Tin-ha if she didn't want to fail the college entrance exam. The first demon, the second demon, the third student. In the class, Nian with his fellows had found ways to pray for high results in the upcoming examination. While playing spiritually, the teacher appeared. He came only to announce Can to meet Mr. Fan in the office. Can ruined the school's photos, but he couldn't meet the teacher. After considering for a long time, she found Tin-ha to persuade him. However, Lo Tin-ha kept teasing a lot. He thought that Can had to help him do something before he could help her. Hearing this, Can left angrily. For a long day, Mr. Fan still found Can. Mr. Fan tried to find her without exhaustion. Finally she was caught by Mr. Fan in the schoolyard. At this point, there was truly no way to fix it. She just came up with an excuse to get the photos for a few days. But Mr. Fan required her to send photos in just one day. After racking her brain, Can came up with the idea of merging the photos together. Can asked Lo Tin-ha to gather Japanese students in the exhibition room, to take photos and edit that photos with Mr. Fan's face. In 2003 the technology was not modern but everything now had changed. Can focused on taking photos for the school that Du-Hai scolded her for not studying. That night her mother phoned her and gave her a new phone. When receiving the phone, she wasn't happy at all. But she didn't lack anything, only her mother. The next day, it should be sent continuously to test the top students of the bull. Just one glance, Du-Hai could find the answer. In terms of Can, she took Mr. Fan's photos secretly. After school, Tin-ha asked her to the men's toilet to carry out the photo editing technique. At this time, Lo Tin-ha had turned the men's toilet into a professional photo room. They were eager to take pictures, but looking at Mr. Fan's face was an alone man. The next day Can went to Nian's class to distribute the outline to her. Recently, she had been nowhere to stay and when seeing that exam paper, she was bored. Even if Nian gave her, she couldn't know how to do it. And she even found ways to edit the school's photos. Du-Hai heard that and laughed, asked her why she hadn't revealed him about it. Can also wanted to reveal it but he didn't give her a chance so he was angry with her. After getting rid of the misunderstanding, Du-Hai and Can were talking happily. Du-Hai gallantly brought her books home and even wanted to take her home. The bell rang for the midterm exam had also arrived. It must be said that the elders worked hard year after year to help Can, and she kept hitting the jackpot. While Can was chatting with Du-Hai, the teacher praised her for taking stunning photos. But she still hid it from the teachers. After seeing the bulletin board photo, Can was amazed by Lo Tin-ha's editing skills. Can was lucky when being praised by the teacher and completing the exam well. When she came to school for studying, she didn't never experience luckiness like that. Someday, there was a rumor that Can was dating with an unknown man. But she didn't know who this person was. The monitor also struggled to find participants for the competition organized by the school. The chubby friend asked each person individually about their talents and skills. Of course, he also went to ask Can and Do-Hoi about their special talents. But she couldn't have any talents apart from sleeping skills. Finally, the class decided to rehearse Snow White and cast. Hearing this, Can immediately imagined when she was a princess and Do-Hoi was a prince. He would come closer to hold her hands tightly. Just imagining like that, she was happy. Then she volunteered to join this rehearsal. Lo Tin-ha also took Can to the back of the schoolyard to show her how beautiful the light was there. Can also kept the distance from Tin-ha since she was afraid of the gossip. She also required him not to find him a lot. At the drama practice, everyone focused more on playing than rehearsing. The drama team had just delivered 2 lines when the bell rang. Although Mr. Truong scolded them for a while, they were perhaps not afraid anymore. Although Can was lazy, she focused on the rehearsal. When coming back home, she practiced her scripts all the time. This was also the reason why she learnt all lines by heart quickly. When Mr. Truong returned the physics papers, everyone were happy when received high scores. Mr. Fan, noticing the high scores in Mr. Truong's class, demanded an explanation. Mr. Truong promised to find the satisfying answer for Mr. Fan as soon as possible. Finally, the day for rehearsal approached. Can felt nervous as she had never stood in front of a crowd like that before. She took the camera to schoolyard. Lo Tin told her that the light and the scenery here were awesome. She took a beautiful picture there. Lo Tin-ha was standing behind her and confirmed that the scenery of this place was on the top. Remembering her role in the play, Can quickly said goodbye to Lo Tin-ha and rushed to the auditorium. Finally, it was time for class October 5th's performance. What seemed unstable turned out surprisingly well. The audience laughed at the humor of the performance. Meanwhile, Mr. Fan called teacher Truong to the supervisor's office to show him Lo Tin-ha pulling Can into the boys' restroom. Seeing Can sneaking around, he suspected that she had stolen the answers for the exam. After the performance, Can and Do-Hoi stayed behind to chat. For a long time, Can had hoped to have a time for talking with Do-Hoi like that. While they were laughing and having fun, teacher Fan suddenly came over and scolded Can. Why did every scene include her? Finding no ways, she had to write a report and explained that her photos had turned out poorly. After that, she had to go into the boys' restroom with Lo Tin-ha to edit the photos. But what Mr. Fan wanted was not this. Seeing that, Mr. Truong asked Can if she had touched the lesson materials or his computer or not. But she didn't do that, so she refused. Mr. Fan decided to personally find the culprit. He went to class and gave 2 exercises, asked 2 students to bring the answers. Of course, the 2 girls called up had done these exercises wrongly. Mr. Fan was angry at Mr. Truong and gave all students in the class 0 mark. Upon hearing that, most of the students felt gloomy. But Mr. Truong still came to class and taught as usual. He also called Do-Hoi to stand up, believing he had done the work and let the whole class copy. Nian panickingly stood up to confess to the teacher since she didn't want others to be involved in this. In the end, Mr. Truong sat sadly alone in the stadium. Seeing him call home to reassure his parents saw a truly heartbreaking sight. It turned out that the teacher wanted to lead his student to be a kind and successful person in the future. Can also confided in Lo Tin-ha about Mr. Truong being dismissed for defending her. Upon hearing that, Lo Tin-ha remarked that Mr. Truong always showed affection to all students, but in the wrong way. After talking with Lo Tin-ha, Can quickly gathered her friends to look for Mr. Truong. A group secretly followed Mr. Truong to an amusement park. Seeing the teacher keeping standing in the folding machine, they ran to persuade him to try. But upon hearing that, Mr. Truong rejected since he was the head teacher of a class. Finally, Can gave Mr. Truong a bear and said that he will be always the head teacher of class 10 out of 5. Hearing students comforting him, he was not happy at all. Then he turned around and walked quietly sorrowfully. Do-Hoi told that all students in the class need to retake the test. We would keep Mr. Truong in case all of us had good marks. The class committee also went to the office to confess and earnestly persuaded him to give them a chance. Because of being scared, Nian revealed all the truth to Mr. Fan. She wanted to confess to Mr. Fan, but she didn't dare to say anything. On the other side, Can also sought help from Ms. Truong. After finishing school, Miss Truong came to see Mr. Fan. It goes without saying that Mr. Fan wouldn't want classes to get 0. The whole class, hiding behind the door, immediately ran over to thank teacher Fan profusely. The literature room ended and Ms. Truong announced that the whole class would be assigned by Mr. Fan. Moreover, the school also organized a retake of the physics exam for the whole class over the weekend. The The whole class was not anxious about academic results anymore. Can was busy studying for the upcoming exam. When Lo Tin-ha invited her to take photos with teacher Fan for the Kite newspaper, without consideration she rejected him. If it weren't for Mr. Truong here, Du-hoi had taught the whole class about physics. While teaching a lesson, everyone could know and understand but want to know about bad or good results. The final exam had finally arrived, and the whole class was seriously. Although Mr. Fan walked back or forth, no one would notice. At the end of the examination, Mr. Truong came in and announced the bad results of his class. Since compared to the whole grade, his class was just the third. Knowing that he was joking, the whole class happily applauded. Only Nian burst into tears since she felt guilty. Can was excited since there was no answer in advance but she could get such high score. Du-hoi also paid compliment on her this time. On this side, Lo Tin-ha joked with a 5-year-old boy, saying that adults prefer their children to study rather than draw. But his parents always support him draw. Not only that, her mother also promised to study at art school. Hearing that, Lo Tin-ha just dreamed on himself. He also wanted his parents to listen to him once. The upcoming parent-teacher meeting was approaching but Can's parents were busy with work and had no time for attending. Can stood sadly in the corridor. Seeing that, Lo Tin-ha came to comfort her. No wonder Lo Tin-ha still hoped that her parents would not go to school to attend. After a while, he asked her if he was far away would she miss him at all. Lo Tin-ha felt that Chan Hoa was not suitable for him at all. That was the reason why he wanted to move to professional art school. Hearing him to confide with, Can couldn't understand what was happening. On the side, Nian was difficult to find someone to pretend to her father. On the way to class, she reminded the pregnant father not to tell her secrets. If everyone knew, she would go to the hell. Can and Du-hoi were also standing on the basketball court to confide each other. She felt that everyone had their parents to go along with but she felt uncomfortable. Can wanted Du-hoi to teach her to play basketball, but Du-hoi refused because her height was limited. But she still stubbornly went to find the ball to force Du-hoi to teach him. After not adapting her study, she had already twisted her ankle. I arrived while waiting for her aunt and asked Du-hoi if he would choose basketball or physics. Also, the time for basketball was longer than the time for physics but he would choose physics. Although Du-hoi and Lo Tin-ha have some similarities, they were very different. They wanted to achieve their personal goals. But Lo Tin-hoi avoided the fact but Du-hoi was ready to face the challenge. Although Mr. Truong had finished the parenting session, Nian's father wanted to say a few more words. He probably feared that if he didn't tell something, everyone would think he was Nian's family. Hearing from that, no one thought like that. After the lesson, Du-hoi asked Mr. Truong to ask for new sheet positions. She feared that his son would fall in love soon, neglecting the study. Hearing that, Du-hoi angrily took his bag and left, while Can felt hurt by Du-hoi's mother's words. In the heavy rain, she burst into tears. She waved down a taxi and told the driver to just drive as much as he wanted, she would pay the fare. Sad yet endearing, the girl. When Du-hoi got home, he argued with his mother in anger. Hearing that, Du-hoi's mother cried and she was probably worried since Du-hoi had a feelings for Can. His parents were always worried about him. If he didn't succeed, his parents will never be restful. The next day, while chasing after Nian, Can bumped into Du-hoi. Seeing Du-hoi hand wrapped in bandages, she immediately asked him. It was just a superficial injury. Can still felt sad for Du-hoi because his mother wouldn't let him sit with her. For the past few days, she had always been in cold argument with his desk mate. They hadn't talked to each other in the whole period. When they reached the physics lab, the two sat far apart, like he was at one end of the river and she was at the other. During the meal, Can's younger brother confided her about romantic relationships. But how embarrassing if at 16, I was losing to my younger brother. The next day at school, Can asked Chu Mat about Tran Tuet Kwan, Du-hoi's middle school desk mate. Chu Mat was Chu-hoi was relatives. He had revealed all when she showed off her bunch. Can just raised her fist to threaten him, and he quickly revealed everything about Tran Tuet Kwan. It turned out that the girl named Tran often encouraged Du-hoi to skip school and hang out, which led to his declining grades. Du-hoi intended to go away from home. Tran Tuet Kwan had taught bad things to him. While they were talking, Chu Mat's boyfriend, who she was dating online, came chasing after her to school. Seeing that, Du-hoi started flailing his arms and legs to intimidate her. Just then Mr. Fan came and suddenly scared the intimidating guy scared. As the guy left angrily, Teacher Fan turned and recognized the familiar troublemakers. He required these students to go back and write the punishment. While copying lines as punishment, Du-hoi kept scolding Can for asking Chu Mat instead of directly asking him. When knowing that Du-hoi's academic performance was worse, his mother went to school and demanded that the teacher separate a couple of friends. Since then, the girl named Tran stopped going to school. Du-hoi, worried that his mother would cause a scene like before, lied that his friend was a boy. Feeling down, Ken went to the beach and ran into Lo Tin-ha. In the restaurant, they held up their beer bottles for showing up without drinking for Real. A little later, Lo Tin-ha went on stage, picked up a guitar, and sang a song that was quite good. In the evening, Ken sat beside to Lo Tin-ha and confided with each other. Ken felt that she and Lo Tin-ha lived in the different worlds. Lo Tin-ha pursued her artistic dreams, while Ken felt like just an ordinary girl. With that, Ken walked away, leaving Lo Tin-ha sitting there alone. A friend came from where and asked him if he liked Ken or was it just a joke. Who would have thought that Lo Xingxia would laugh and say that he was super fond of Ken? Nian and Jian Dan were happily skipping home, when teacher Truong grabbed Nian at the gate and took her to the principal's office. Before Mr. Truong could say a word, Nian gave 1,001 excuses along with her plight. Mr. Truong also advised her and helped her understand that lying was very wrong. Mr. Truong was a truly compassionate and understating teacher who empathizes with his students' feelings. If the teacher stayed strict, students might continue lying and develop a fear of him, creating more distance. That night, Nian called to confide Ken. Nian promised to be a good girl and a hard-working student. Seeing her changes, Ken also wanted to change her own style and characteristics. The next morning she got up early to cook breakfast and made Ha's parents surprised. In the morning, I thought that a thief broke into the house. The teacher and the girl smiled wryly at her determination to change and become a better version of herself. During the class, Ken struggled with math problems but Du Hai helped her. However, Ken quickly stopped him because she wanted to challenge herself. Since she was rarely motivated to study English like that, no one would stand in her own way. After the class, Ken was still doing homework very hard. Anyone who didn't know even think Ken was a top student to learn. Teacher Truong announced that there would be a field trip on Friday, but Du Hai couldn't participate because the field trip coincided with the physics exam. In terms of Tin Ha's class, there was Tin Ha who volunteered to participate. In the end, only the teacher and Lo Tin Ha from the whole class participated in the field trip. But Ken's class was contrast. Since nearly the whole class agreed to participate, Miss Truong decided to rent a big bus for the trip. On this side, Mr. Han drove Tin Ha around the streets on a bicycle. It looked tragic. Mr. Truong took all students in his class to go hiking exhaustedly. In the class only Nian excitedly climbed the mountain with Mr. Truong. To the top of the mountain Ken Cam Mai on Chup Fong Can Hua Tin Sung Quan. Nian sat nextly Mr. Truong and didn't stop asking him. It was likely that Nian fell for Mr. Truong when he gently comforted her. At the same time, Lo Tin-ha was also being taken to Bak Kwa University to watch a chemistry experiment. Then Mr. Han took Tin-ha to eat sidewalk bread. Although there were only two teachers, they felt happy. For him, just going out and eating were very happy. In the cafe, Can and her two close friends happily talked, each enthusiastically praising their crushes. Only Can was still very vague in his ambiguous relationship with Du Hai. Ken didn't know to say anything since they hadn't identified the relationship. It was just a vague relationship as a rumor. The next day, Ken also brought the bird to class. Du Hai said that while a caged bird is safe, it would be much freer if released. Upon hearing that, it would be better if she raised the bird. When the bell rang, Ken pulled out her notebook to study math. She optimistically believed that if she worked hard, she would be good at maths. Since she arrived early, Lean set out magazines to read everyone's horoscopes. Due to her curiosity by nature, Ken also moved closer to eavesdrop. After reading the magazine, Nian confidently announced that today the love god would bless for her. Upon hearing that, she imagined that Du Hai would hold her hands tightly to say loving words. Jian Dan had to shake Ken vigorously to wake her up, but she didn't know that Du Hai suffered from a fever at home. Du Hai's mother also asked his teacher to give him a day off. Hearing this news, she felt very sad. She swore that from now on, she would never believe in horoscopes again. Yet the book dared to say that today she would be blessed by the love god. If Grad isn't going to school, what will he have to illuminate? This is just being nosy, not illuminating anything. During English class, Ken wanted to call Du Hai to check on him but hesitated to disturb the sick boy. After some hesitation, she decided to text his mother. Ken felt more at ease only after receiving a reassuring message from Du Hai's mother. During the break time, there was another message. It turned out that the person who answered the message was Du Hai, not his mother. Hearing this, Ken felt even more relieved. While playing with her two close friends, Ken pulled Chu Mat aside to ask how to write a love letter to a boy. The master of love, Zhou Mat, also confidently stood up and instructed the three girls. Hearing from Chu Mat, her advice sounded very professional, but it was just her opinion. Not all boys are like that. It was unbelievable. Only Nian was upside down to believe the words of the love expert Zhou Mat. That's why she went to find a teacher, but did what Chu Mat said. I don't know if it will be successful or not, but Nian is still very happy. After reconciling with the three girls, Chu Mat also hung out with Lo Tin Ha. Lo Tin Ha asked Chu Mat if there was a way to have a chemical reaction without chemistry or a catalyst. After thinking for a while, Chu Mat concluded that it could only be done with water and nachi. In class, Can was distracted, busy texting Du Hai instead of studying. Lo Tin Ha, influenced by Chu Mat, secretly went to the chemistry lab to conduct experiments. In the end, Lo Tin Ha took a bottle of some strange chemical and went to find Can. Upon learning that Can was not in class, Lo Tin Ha decided to retreat for the time being. In the cafeteria, Jian Dan happily shared that she had dared to talk to her crush. Nian also excitedly showed off that Mr. Truong promised to invite her to eat KFC. Only Can was still texting Du Hai without knowing whether to eat something. The next day, recalling Chu Mat's instructions, he practiced weak and soft silk desertion. Suddenly, Du Hai appeared behind, saying that she was mad. Upon hearing this, Can immediately stood up and hit Du Hai, sending him sprawling on the ground. While the two were chatting and laughing happily together, Lo Tin Ha ran over. Seeing Can with someone else, Lo Tin Ha was taken aback and left with the nachi jar. John Don and her crush grew closer each day. While borrowing a book, they found out a secret conversation between a couple. She and her crush read the entire book. Nian, fond of her teacher, excelled in her studies. Whenever the teacher called on her, Nian eagerly volunteered to go to the board, but she always got the answers wrong. Lo Tin Ha patiently waited by the water tower for Can. When Can appeared, Lo Tin Ha declared her love for him was as strong as the chemical reaction. Then Lo Tin Ha opened the nachi jar and threw it into the water tower. Water splashed everywhere, and the teacher, like a startled dog, ran frantically down to scold Lo Tin Ha. The next day, when Can arrived at school, she saw everyone gossiping. On top of that, when she got to class, Du Hai ignored her completely. Wherever Du Hai went, Can followed him and talked sweetly. During the lunch, she felt down and confided in her two close friends. Although Can liked Du Hai, her friends fully supported Lo Tin Ha. Lo Tin Ha was not only handsome but also talented and wealthy. Not only that, he boldly confessed his feelings for Can in front of everyone. We couldn't find a good man like that. At that time Lo Tin Ha had just arrived at school. Following Lo Tin Ha was a girl with dark lips, puffing on a cigarette. Additionally, she didn't wear the school uniform and just followed Lo Tin Ha. When Can arrived, she saw the girl holding Du Hai's hand and acting cute. Can returned to class feeling sad. When Lo Tin Ha entered the classroom, his friends continuously teased him, making him furious. Lo Tin Ha nearly made his classmate forget the way home with his antics. Then he went to the next classroom to find Can, chasing her all the way to the restroom. Seeing Can, Lo Tin Ha pulled her to a secluded corner of the corridor and kept flirting. Seeing them by the scene, Du Hai took her back to the class. While Du Hai was about to teach her, Tuet Quan chased after them to the classroom. She wanted to tell something clearly to Du Hai. When Tuet Quan got close to Du Hai, he pulled her into the hallway to talk more easily. Unexpectedly, she came here just to ask him if he ever liked her. For a long time she believed that he liked her, which was why he sat at her table. But he had never fallen for her as ever before. Hearing Du Hai's clear response, Tran Tuet Quan was heartbroken. During the gym class, seeing Can rushing forward, Du Hai also chased after him. Everyone saw them and thought that they were crazy. While running, Nian announced that the little bird had died. Hearing that, they rushed quickly to find the bird. They gradually walked to commemorate the little bird. On the way she saw Can sitting and watching some chickens. Seeing people selling chickens, Du Hai approached to buy one for her, but she stopped him. Then Du Hai took Can to the small game store. But after playing for a short time, she found it so boring. Some games that required quick thinking and speed were not suitable for her. While Du Hai was engrossed in the game, Can took out the camera to take his photos. Just then Tran Tuet Quan casually walked by. Seeing the beautiful girl, the owner came up with bad intentions. Hearing the loud shouting, Du Hai recognized his friend's voice. And of course he couldn't bear his friend, Tran Tuet, being harmed like that. It was already dark, and after leaving the game store, Can found out that she had forgotten the camera. Before returning to the game shop to get the camera, the two took Tran Tuet Quan to a water shop. And during that time, Tran Tuet asked Can if she liked Du Hai. But Can didn't dare to speak his heart. Du Hai returned to game store and took the camera and left two girls sitting each other. And at that time, she admitted falling for Du Hai to Tuet Quan. Tran Tuet Quan was so drunk that he fed the dog tea in the middle of people's water shops. Waiting for Du Hai for a long time, she had taken Tuet Quan back home. When the two girls got home, everyone felt very confused. Tuet Quan was drunk, rambling nonsensically, leaving everyone puzzled. After having the meal, Tuet Quan had lipstick smeared all over her mouth. Her eyes were smeared with mascara after crying. Coming to the bathroom and saw herself in front of the mirror, Tuet Quan felt panic. She couldn't imagine that Ken didn't even have cotton pads. After sitting in the living room, Tuet Kwan went to get more drinks. She just kept saying gossips alone. And at that time, Du Hai called them. Ken felt relieved and quickly Tuet Kwan downstairs to take her back home. Because Du Hai came to the game store to take the camera for Ken, he was beaten. They took Tuet Kwan back home, but she kept holding onto Ken's arm, refusing to let her go. In fact, when they were in the secondary school, the classmates didn't like Tran Tuet. But what Ken cared was Du Hai's wound at that time. At that time, Lo Tin Ha was still sitting in the courtyard to wait for her. Not only that, he also gave her a letter, asking her to read it when she got home. Reading the letter from Lo Tin Ha, she couldn't help but smiling broadly. The next morning, when she arrived at school, she ran into Lo Tin Ha. She returned the letter, but he refused it. Arriving at class, Du Hai prepared a breakfast for Ken. Seeing the papers, Du Hai tended to read it, but Ken quickly took it. It was time for break, but Ken had to stay for a meeting about the upcoming choir competition. All students in the class reluctantly practiced singing. While Du Hai was busy doing homework, Ken lightly nudged him, and he snapped at her. While walking in the schoolyard, a girl passing by bumped into Ken's attention. She followed that girl all the way to ballet studio and stood outside. In the evening, she stood in front of the mirror and imagined her to be a professional ballet dancer. The next day her mother came to take her to school. Seeing her daughter's strange outfit, she was surprised. Ken was determined to help Du Hai change, but he didn't notice. After school, she bumped into Lo Tin Ha at the gate. Lo Tu Hai kept praising her and took her to the shopping center to buy clothes. Finally, Lo Tin Ha bought Ken a scarf, and she could only smile. Coming to class, she kept seeing the scarf and she wondered why Du Hai's behavior was strange towards her. A little later, Du Hai asked Ken to bring him a pen to the rooftop. There, he spoke to her in vague, ambiguous terms. At that moment, while the class practiced for the choir, Du Hai was excused, making everyone envious. Because of this, Ken had to borrow the speaker herself. On her way to get it, she accidentally ran into Du Hai, who was heading back to class. Hearing that the class hadn't finished practicing, Du Hai turned to head upstairs and left Ken angry. The school bell rang. Standing alone at the school gate, Lo Tin Ha rode up and gave her a milk tea and a handwritten letter. Meanwhile, Du Hai was at school. After leaving the restroom, he heard a cry for help from the girl's bathroom. But he didn't imagine that the girl asked him to buy some sanitary pads. And he reluctantly helped her. Sam behind him laughed and teased Du Hai. After buying the pads, he had to take them to the girl's bathroom. And that girl was Tu, who was Du Hai's desk mate. As Ken returned to class and saw Du Hai talking happily with another girl, she was sad. The next day, during cleanup, Ken asked Du Hai to help, but he declined because he needed to practice for an exam. Seeing Du Hai run off like that made Ken furious. While the class was handing out uniforms, he popped his head in. Seeing Du Hai care about Tu, she felt upset and refused to change clothes. After changing, Ken and Du Hai exchanged glances and smiled at each other. Seeing that Nian pulled them to a corner to take a picture, and afterwards, they went up to the rooftop. Du Hai praised her scarf and rubbed her head, which made her feel happier. The next morning when Du Hai was working the school, Ken asked him about the competition. But Du Hai kept silent and didn't share anything. During the flag, Du Hai threw stones at Ken again. He declared that he was good at the exam, he just wanted to tease her. After school, Du Hai invited Ken to eat. When they saw it was too expensive, they tried to sneak out but were caught by the staff. The newly opened restaurant offered a free large cake to customers. If they couldn't eat all, they would have to pay as usual. In the end, they ate until they were full. On the plate there were a few pieces left, they kept pushing it back and forth. Back in class, as the choir instructor was about to start, students made excuses to skip practice. As the bell rang, Tu suddenly praised her scarf, and said that it was beautiful. Tu wanted to buy a similar scarf, so she invited Ken to go shopping with her. Tu asked Ken to eat ice cream. While eating at the shop, Tu kept asking about Du Hai. She wasn't sure if she could pursue Du Hai or if her classmate would reject her. When Tu asked like that, it made Ken feel confused. As they were about to leave, Tu bought 2 cups at the ice cream shop and decided against buying a scarf. It was also the reason why she invited Ken for eating ice cream. The next day, Du Hai asked Ken to bring him a glass of water. Ken was surprised to see the cup Tu had bought for Du Hai. In the canteen, Tu also came nearer to sit next to them. Moreover, Tu deliberately offered her food to Ken. Seeing the opponent sitting next to Ken's crush, she felt angry. That evening, Ken went into the kitchen to cook for everyone. All members had to wait for a long time to eat lunch. After tasting Ken's cooking, everyone complained it was too salty. The next morning, Tu brought cake and gave Du Hai. Moreover, Tu also asked Du Hai to play some music. Tutor also invited Can to join together. It seemed she wanted to tease Can. Tutor played the piano while Duhoi blew the trumpet. Her purpose in inviting Can to come here was because she wanted her to take photos for them. After developing the photos, everyone noticed that Can had only taken a picture of Duhoi and deliberately cut off Tutor's corner. Put your armpits up to see if there are any dark spots, little girl. While the whole class gathered to practice singing but it seemed bad, Duhoi made them sing one by one. When it was Song's turn, the whole class laughed. After that, Can went to the schoolyard to practice singing alone, but Lo Tinha accidentally stumbled upon her. Lu Xinghe also gave a high opinion to Jing. Ultimately Can had to return to practice the choir with her class while Lo Tinha practiced drawing in the next room. Seeing Can's class practicing, Lo Tinha suddenly had an idea. Lo Tinha hired a full drum set to perform at school, attracting many female students. Can ran to the practice room to find Duhoi, only to see him chatting with Tu Tian. They sang so engrossly that Duhoi didn't answer her. Feeling angry, she decided to lock them inside. When she returned the classroom, she suddenly heard the singing sound somewhere. Guessing that it was Lo Tinha, Can slowly followed the singing. Seeing Can's moodiness, Lo Tinha immediately pulled her over to teach her how to play the drums. A while later, he asked her to come back but he rejected. As dusk settled, Duhoi and Lo Tinha competed to drink an entire case of drinks at the convenience store. The shop owner stood wide-eyed and confused at the two young men. Finally the time for cultural competition between classes had arrived. Although the performance of Lo Tinha's class was great, Can's was more impressive. While waiting for the results, Lo Tinha suddenly ran up on stage to speak. Just in some few days, Lo Tinha had to leave Tran Hoa. So he wanted to dedicate a song specifically to Can. Finally her class received the encouraging award. Seeing that results, no one in the classroom was happy. Tian sadly went to the restroom and cried alone. Seeing that, she approached closer to comfort her. Then she took Tu Tian to the balcony to take photos together. In the afternoon, as Duhoi and Can sat by the beach enjoying the scenery, Lo Tinha suddenly appeared. Lo Tinha cheerfully said he would invite Duhoi for soft drinks until they were tired of it. Seeing the two getting along so well, Can was quite surprised. The next day Mr. Truong announced that the class S score ranked the 4th in the whole grade. Hearing that, everyone felt extremely happy. Mr. Truong praised Can, noting that she improved significantly thanks to her benefactor's support. On the way to school with Duhoi, despite the cold, Can happily ate an ice cream. In the meal everyone praised Can. His father was pleased to see her remarkable progress. Not only that, she was rewarded by her father with extra English classes. Oh my god, reward what is not rewarded, reward schooling. During the winter break, she had to go to extra classes, which made her sad. However, the next morning, Dad stubbornly insisted on waking Can up to go to school no matter what. After finishing her English class, she saw Duhoi standing behind her. After receiving an important message, Can hurriedly took off. She also warned him against chasing after her. On top of that, Can even prohibited Duhoi from following her closely. After going to the restroom for a while, she saw her father and Duhoi arguing together. Witnessing this scene, she felt helpless and confused. In the evening, his father kept praising Duhoi. The next day, the two close friends bought Can a DVD of an adult film. However, Can, being innocent and naive, had no idea what it was. It wasn't until the evening when she came home and opened it to watch, Can realized the harsh truth. The next day was Can's birthday. Her parents prepared a birthday party for her, but she had another party with her friends. It was precisely because of this incident that Dad scolded Can harshly. Aunt Ha had to endure a lot before Mr. finally calmed down and allowed Can to go out with her friends. But before going out she had to take her younger brother to set off firecrackers. But when the firecrackers exploded, her younger brother couldn't run up and became fainted afterwards. She rushed quickly to call his parents. Upon hearing the bad news, Aunt Ha pushed Can forcefully, causing her head to hit the wall and rendering her unconscious. It wasn't until his dad shook Can that she finally conscious. On the other side their friends were waiting for her. But when Duhoi kept calling her, she didn't answer him. Seeing that all her friends were worried about her. Who knew Can had left her phone at her dad's while at her mom's. Waiting her for a long time, they decided to start the celebration without her. Just Duhoi expressed sad emotions. While studying, Duhoi kept spilling his drink and dropped the gift for Can. The next morning, Can woke up and immediately looked for Duhoi's phone number to call him. After finding his phone number, and he focused on playing and didn't answer her. When Can walked down the street, she heard the bicycle and thought that it was Duhoi's. She quickly turned around but the bicycle had passed by. Can came to the game store but didn't see Duhoi there. At the same time, Duhoi also came to his house to find Can. The neighbor saw Duhoi's strange behavior and suspected he was a thief. When Aunt Ha got home and heard the neighbor, she became very worried. Ant-kan grabbed a knife and headed toward Can-Can's room. Ant-kan picked up a knife and walked toward Can-Can's room. Can-Can also invited everyone for a meal to make up for having let them down on her birthday. Can-Can was scared by her friends, leaving her pale. Later, she talked with Do-Hwa about her family. Suddenly, dust got in her eyes. Her friends, watching from afar, mistakenly thought they were flirting. On her way home, Can-Can unexpectedly met Lo Tin-ha, who had come to wish her a happy birthday. They strolled around town, and as they were leaving, Lo Tin-ha gave Can-Can the final letter. On the first day of the new semester, the class was cheerful, but their joy quickly faded with the stress of dividing into natural and social science tracks. Only Do-Hwa had his own path. He planned to study abroad to become a PhD in science. At noon, while everyone was eating in the cafeteria, a rather unfamiliar teacher appeared. She told a story about a senior to help students with their track choices. He was an outstanding student, but when choosing a university, he chose a law school. After graduating, he took on major cases but resigned after 6 months, having earned 300,000. He had used this money to travel around. The social sciences track wasn't valued as highly as the natural sciences, but the latter wasn't always the best choice either. After hearing this, Nian immediately asked a few questions, but the teacher dismissed her. Back in class, Nian angrily tore up her track selection form. Can-Can carefully sought advice from a senior. Can-Can didn't want to be apart from Do-Hwa, making her track choice harder. While struggling with this, she suddenly received a letter. At home, Can-Can opened the letter and found drawings from Lo Tin-ha. This seemed to be Lo Tin-ha's normal life. From the drawings, Can-Can realized she was comfortable with her chosen path. The next day everyone began signing up for sports competition. Can-Can surprisingly mustered the courage to choose volleyball. While playing volleyball, Do-Hwa accidentally hit Can-Can on the head, prompting her to angrily walk away. Do-Hwa came to check on her. Upon learning that Can-Can would join the social science track, she felt sad. On this side, Nian heard that Mr. Truong tended to confess love to another. She sat heartbrokenly at the corner. The next morning, she followed Mr. Truong secretly but pretended to be accidental. At the shopping center, he invited her to eat ice cream. After asking about Mr. Truong's going to confess, Nian took him to buy a new shirt. This little student also generously gave the teacher an extra tie. At that time Can-Can was confused between choosing a board. Finding no ways, she called Lo Tin-ha for advice. Hearing that Lo Tin-ha asked her to go to Back Kin for relaxing, Nian followed her teacher and waited for the girl she would confess love. She also advised the dress style for him. Finally the girl she wanted to meet wouldn't come, so they left together. It was also dark. All students were confused which field they should choose between social and natural sciences. But Do-Hwa and Can-Can were different. Do-Hwa was good at natural sciences but Can-Can was bad at. Mr. Truong, after being climbed a tree, invited his colleagues to drink drunk. Both girls were crying because of the worries. The next day, everyone was sad, but they had to decide. In the end, Can-Can still chose the social department. Do-Hwa was so heartwarmed by this that he broke his pen. Finally, the volleyball competition arrived. She was hit by a ball after entering the match. Do-Hwa worriedly ran over and dealt with the wood since she has practiced a lot for the match. No matter what she was winner or not, she deserved her efforts since the process was also important. The school year has begun. During the mealtime, Can-Can was still studying hard. When he became home, she still burned the midnight oil. Lo Tin-ha always remembered her and often called with her. In the painting contest, she painted Can-Can. After finishing the competition, she took Can-Can for meal. After eating, it was already dark. Lo Tin-ha took her to the shore and flirted with her, but she was still sad. During meals, Do-Hwa frequently asked his mother about switching to the social department. No matter how he explained, she insisted he study natural sciences. The next morning, all students stood in front of school gate and enjoyed Lo Tin-ha's works of art. As the guard arrived at the school gate, Tin-ha slowly walked over from the other side of the road, just as Tin-ha was about to say hello. Before leaving, Lo Tin-ha gifted Can-Can a sketchbook filled with her drawings. The silhouette of Lo Tin-ha gradually faded away. After finishing the exam, all friends took each other to eat and drink. When everyone gathered in large number at the restaurant, they looked at each other sadly. Afterwards they took each other to watch a movie. Can-Can and Do-Hwa sat together at the movie theater. Everyone had a couple with a couple, only there are no people who are sitting and watching movies. Do-Hwa gently took her hand at the emotional scene. Nian had fallen asleep and drooled in the theater. After the movie, they rushed to karaoke. They played and sang without being tired as if it were the last time they met. Nian felt that singing without any drinks was too boring, so she went to buy some beer. After being drunk, Do-Hwa asked Can-Can surprisingly to sing with him a song. Nian pointed at them but Can-Can didn't let her talk anymore. Finally they hugged each other and cried. During taking photos, Do-Hwa put on her shoulder affectionately. Seeing her being drunk, he took her back home. In front of the yard, he also rubbed Kansang's head before leaving. Day by day, a term ended, a new school year began. Not seeing Kan next him, he felt sad. But she had appeared unexpectedly and surprisingly. After that, she decided to change her decisions because of her friends and everything. Seeing her following the natural fields, he was overjoyed. In this year there was also a new girlfriend. She had captured everyone's attention, especially Nian. In a previous exam, the confusion was ranked first, making Nian feel something thrilling. Not only that, Nian was always pretending. After the bell had rang, she walked into the students' exam book. After returning the papers, Du Hai called him to blame him for not being responsible enough. In this exam, 5 students in the class scored below average in literature, and Du Hai was one of them. Not only teacher also compared Boy Lam and Du Hai. Hearing that, Nian showed her dislike to Boy Lam. During the break time, Kan White some bad students lined up in a long line in the hallway. They had been scolded by Mr. Truong until the phone rang. Mr. Truong informed that his class's academic performance had been worse, since he wanted his class to divide into many small groups to help each other. After school, Nian and Kan reminded them to stay away from Boy Lam, since Nian didn't like Boy Lam. If I don't like your friends, you can't hang out with them either. Seeing Boy Lam standing beside her was like watching a stepmother next to her stepson. But after finishing school, they still enjoyed a stroll happily. On that side, Du Hai and Kan were studying together at Nian's house. The 3 students did not study, but played cards until it was dark. As soon as Kan got home, he saw his parents tensely with like strings waiting for her to come back. Thanks to frequent calls to ask teacher, her mother could follow her achievements. She decided to let Kan study abroad. The next day John Don always praised Boy Lam, which made Nian annoyed. The conversation from them were disclosed. While studying, the confused group expressed his desire to join the group of close friends of the simple. 2 days later, Nian and Kan crossed her hands to the cafeteria and asked John Don to stay with them. Boy Lam's appearance made Nian angrily say extremely difficult words. Hearing that, John Don was also sad and left without saying. In the days, he simply always accompanied the embarrassment without paying attention to Nian. In the literature lesson, Du Hai still played with words, so he was kicked out off the corridor. Having been kicked out of the class, Du Hai can still sit outside and doze off. Nian wanted to draw a scrawl on Du Hai's office, but it was prevented by Kan. In the basketball class, Nian angrily held the ball, but John came to prevent it. After being scolded by John Don, she looked utterly miserable. As the mediator, Kan arranged to meet John Don and Nian to discuss things face to face. If their close friendship fell apart, it wouldn't worth it at all. They sat in front of the gate and argued each other. On the way, Kan and Nian saw an old woman crying out. When they brought their aunt to a cafe, they learned her daughter had left home. They would promise to help her daughter. After getting the contact number, they headed to internet cafe to investigate. After putting the buttocks, they caught Du Hai skipping rolls to rock. They asked Du Hai and Chu Mat to use the phone number to search for information about Ms. Mai's daughter. On this side, John Don's group were studying in a coffee shop. While Boy Lam was in the restroom, John Don intentionally borrowed Han Tu's notebook, taking the chance when John Don received the photos. When it got darker, John Don was wallen home and cried lower in the middle of street. At this point, Du Hai's group had also found the location of Ms. Mai's daughter. A group decided to depart from there. As soon as they got into the taxi, they received a call from John Don. With no other option, Kan had to arrange to meet John Don at the location the group was heading to. And finally they could go where they need to go. Seeing Du Hoa's excitement. Seeing the fat man, the whole group rushed to inquire, but he definitely didn't show his teeth half a word. Upon arriving at, John couldn't understand what was happening that time. After arresting wrongly, Ms. Mai called to ask for her. After that, Ms. Mai also informed Kan that she had found her daughter. When coming back home, Nian approached her Kan gestures. Nian came and got rid of the hands far away. Finally they took up to the shore and shared each other. After a heartfelt apology from John Don, Nian felt happy as if nothing had happened. However, there was only 1 week left before Nian had to move to Beijing. The newly bloomed joy has faded. The next day Kan wandered alone in the corridor and department in thought. Seeing that Du Hai came to ask her, the class monitor, having heard that Nian was moving to Beijing, felt very sad about it. Suddenly, Kan remembered her saying that difficult times wouldn't last forever if you persevered. Throughout the class, Kan felt weak like a stale loaf of bread. But it was not due to Nian. That night Mr. Trun would come to her house to talk with her parents. It was already dark and Mr. Truong had come to her house. He came all this way just to discuss academic issues and offer some suggestions for schools for Kan. Coming back home, she saw a lot of homework that she wanted to cry out. Not only that, her mother immediately asked her to the Pollock. The next day, as soon as he arrived at class, Du Hai scolded Kan for not doing her homework properly. Nian Nian upsetly scolded the class monitor, and then rushed to meet Mr. Truong. The monitor also followed Nian Nian and didn't leave her side. Why she couldn't say anything even she liked him. John Don, feeling frustrated, had a second serving of rice at lunch. After finishing school, 3 of friends came to take photos. At that time, they were drunk and confided in each other. After finishing this glass, we'll still be good sisters in the next life. Being in her drunken state, Nian Nian even knocked over the restaurant dining table. The one who had to clean up this mess was, of course, Mr. Truong. He was also the one who took Nian Nian home. Can also called Du Hai. Finally, Du Hai had appared. They wanted to take over a new role for taking this girl back home. John Don was so drunk, so she talked gossip every time. Finding no ways, Chu Mat could only sit and listen to her heart. Du Hai also took Can downstairs, but Can was still more alert than the other two. When Mr. Truong brought Nian Nian home, she gathered all her courage to confess her feelings to him. The next day, Can, John Don and the class monitor took Nian Nian to the airport. The monitor confessed his feelings to her and hugged her. Whenever friends faced difficulties, the first one to rush over and shout was always her. Anyone who dares to bully my friends was definitely facing Nian Nian. Although she was alone, she seemed always optimistic and happy. She always came out to protect her friends. When we were by our side, we sometimes ignored the importance of their partners. Just when we separated, we began to recall that unforgettable memories for the past days. Time has surpassed so quickly. Can right now was the 12th student. When Can stood in front of the balcony, she just saw the scrapbook on the key above. Sitting in the classroom, she received Lo Tin Ha's letter. Above the letter was a short sentence that did not let Tin Ha peep. It was all ready, but Du Hai still called for teaching Can. After finishing study, she opened the Lo Tin Ha's letter to read. The next day, while she was studying with Du Hai, but she didn't focus at all. She wanted to register for studying at Beijing Film School because of her friends there. After finishing school, her mother came to take her back home. She always wanted her daughter to study abroad, but she had decided to get into Beijing Film School. No one could change her decision. Meanwhile, John Don followed behind Boy Lam and Han Tu. Seeing them hugging each other, John Don felt miserable. Chu Mat immediately rushed to teach Han Tu a lesson and ran to find John Don. But after finding every corner, he couldn't find her. While Can and Du Hai were studying in a group, Chu Mat informed them that John Don was missing. Seeing what he informed, 3 of them came to Han Tu's house. Chu Mat angrily scolded Han Tu. John Don was miserable and left without saying when he saw his crush taking another girl to the hotel. Han Tu, angry, pushed Can, causing her to fall down. Can felt angry and scolded Han Tu for that. The milk Han Tu drank daily and the books he used were all provided by John Don. You might not like her but didn't let her suffer. Han Tu went to every location that he went but couldn't find her. Seeing the balloon by the road, Chu Mat recalled John Don wanting to visit the place shown on it. Thinking of it, Chu Mat quickly ran over. Over here, Can and Du Hai were walking in the dark tunnel. Although Can was trembling with fear, he felt eased with Du Hai by his side. In the past, Can admired John Don very much because she was willing to pursue her love. But she felt sad when her love ended tragically. However, from the very beginning John Don was wrong when she loved more than others. Chu Mat had to plead intensely with the ticket seller to let him tag along to the island. Finally Chu Mat could find John Don. Upon arrival, he found John Don sitting in the middle of the island, crying loudly. Seeing that he was Chu Mat, she was a little bit disappointed. But was it better? On the way back, Can was anxiously worried because he still hadn't found John Don. And then, Chu Mat informed that he could find John Don. Finally, Can could let go of the heavy burden in his heart. Han Tu also called Can to apologize to John Don. Why not just call John Don directly, young man? Han Tu leaned against the wall and cried loudly. Love was something that was very difficult to say. Chu Mat quietly stood behind John Don, gauging the tide before running to find a boat to the shore. Looking at the island one more time, tears streamed down John Don's cheeks. At that time, Can was asleep on the boat, waiting for the two to return. If John Don knew that Han Tu was also anxiously searching for her today, she would be much happier. However, sometimes not knowing was much better. Life was long, and we must experience both bitterness and sweetness to understand its richness. Du Hai encouraged Can to definitely apply to Beijing Film Academy. Du Hai would also work hard to get into Tan Hoa University. John Don with Chu Mat sat by the beach and watched the sunrise. She thanked Chu Mat for being there during her toughest times. It was morning, and John Don returned safely. Seeing this, Can hurriedly ran over and hugged her, the only person still beside her. Mr. Truong also ran to the boat dock worriedly. Even though he was worried inside, he kept teasing his most troublesome students. Mr. Truong, Can, and Du Hai also found out the affair. How could Mr. Truong wear the teacher's scarf like this? John Don has turned into social sciences, so it made her feel more comfortable. After all, Han too was not a person at fault. Unrequited love means you just had to accept it. In a few days, Can would attend the exam for getting into Beijing University. A new life full of exciting things awaited Can and Du Hai ahead. Upon arriving in Beijing, Can immediately called Nian to pick him up. Seeing his long-lost friend again was a warm and joyful reunion, like a celebration. The two girls happily clung to each other as they went out to eat. During the meal, Can told everything that had happened since Nian left. Du Hai and Chu Mat, full of youthful enthusiasm, set off with their backpacks to the big city. They moved to a special classroom for review lesson. Although Du Hai worked hard, he still spent time calling Can. After this call, Du Hai would have his phone confiscated by the exam prep center. Those who come here could only study and learn. The next morning Can with her parents took picture in her school gate. Lo Tinha also picked up Can to go out. He took her visit the university and visited everywhere. Her important day finally came, and Can tried his best to complete the exam. On the other side, Du Hai secretly called her to encourage her for the upcoming exam. On results day, Can was too nervous to go in, so he asked his dad to check for him. After seeing the results, they were excited since their daughter had passed the entrance exam. Finally she had won herself and it deserved. On this side, Du Hai was taken by his father since he secretly phoned Can. Du Hai didn't even have time to finish the sentence with Can who had to hang up in the middle of the school. That night, she noticed her mother's shirt was stained and reminded her that it was old. Can's mother said sending her to school cost a lot, so she had to save as much as possible. It was obvious that their parents were perfect. Perhaps they loved Can infinitely and even forget about the other. The next morning, Lo Tinha took Can to go to the drama academy. He took her to the place where everyone was practicing for the upcoming rehearsal. After that, Lo Tinha invited Can to dinner. On this side, when Du Hai sneaked into the teacher room and he was caught red-handed, his teacher was strict and Du Hai begged him to call home. But this time, Can didn't reply. Du Hai felt sad and left the phone to the old location. Can asked her mother for permission to eat with Lo Tinha but she didn't agree. Finding no ways, he told him for another chance. At that time, Du Hai tried his best to fix the public phone but he couldn't. It's true that wisdom in the countryside was a normal thing. After taking her to the meeting point, Tinha sadly said that it took her a long time to meet her. Seeing her optimistic like that, he felt happy for her. Then he kissed Can and said that they would meet again if fate allowed. Seeing him away, she rushed to the restaurant to eat a meal with her parents. It took them a long time like that to eat a meal together. The three of them raised their glasses to toast Can. Although Du Hai had top grades at Tran Hoa, he was at average point there. And he even lost his attention during the lessons. After several failures, Du Hai was determined and took the physics equipment to fix the payphone. On this side, Can was also practicing for the rehearsal. Her opponents were some formidable characters. Finally Du Hai managed to fix the phone and called Can. She had cried when hearing his voice afterwards, but the judges believed that she was playing for a rehearsal. All judges paid many compliments on her rehearsal. For this rehearsal, she wanted to check the results on her own without her father's help. Standing in front of the announcement board, she looked disappointed as she didn't see her name on the list of accepted students. Since she has failed, so whole family returned to their hometown afterwards. On this side, Du Hai was not better than her. Du Hai sadly sent messages to Can to inform her. Many years for his attempts were worthless. Was failing and not getting into university the worst thing in life? They would have another path instead of getting into university. If this door closed, another one would open for us. Can and Du Hai returned to class to continue studying for the next exam. Knowing of being the failure in the entrance college exam, Du Hai felt sad. He decided not to contact with Can for a short time to focus on studying and preparing for the exam. Back home, Du Hai's mother kept asking about the exam, deepening his sadness. Some parents focused solely on their children's achievements, neglecting their feelings. The next morning, Can bought a bread and lightly came to sit next to Du Hai. But Du Hai gave it back to Can at once. While Du Hai gazed into the distance, Can ran over to invite him to listen to music together. They sat next to the window and enjoyed the scenery. But he suddenly asked her if she wanted to see him shed tears. The important college exam was approaching and the teacher felt more worried. There was a friend who even went to see nurses due to pressure of studying a lot. Although she has been rescued, there would be sequelae left behind. It were the miserable outcomes. It was just an exam and there was no need to put much pressure on them like that. Although the university gate was a huge step in life, but it was not the only path to success. But Du Hai's mother always controlled him as ever. After once going to the classroom to watch his son through the small doorway, she decided to meet Du Hai for not interrupting her son. She also told her not to talk with Du Hai and let him concentrate on his study. Hearing that, Can said that she herself had always hidden in her heart. In reality, Du Hai's mother was just using the guise of family to control her son. if she really loved him and understood him. On this side, John Donne was accused by the proctor of cheating during the exam, and the chance for her to pass into the university wouldn't probably leave. That night Can along with his fellows went out to eat and drink drunk. They raised their glasses of orange juice instead of wine and promised to pass university together. On the way back, Can had apologized to Du-Hoi. Can told him that if he had problems, he could tell her to better his temper. Seeing Du-Hoi's sorrowful expression, Can also felt unhappy, trying to hide her own feelings. Just one day left, the hard exam preparation period would end. Mr. Truong had revised all and reminded every students. 3 years of high school passed quickly. After 3 years being together with happiness and sadness, there were some fell and someone stayed. Finally Can took the final picture for the class. The last lesson was filled with tears. The alarm clock rang cheerfully. After 2 exhausting days of exams, Can slept soundly. Can arrived at school still unable to believe she had finished the university entrance exam. Everyone was nearly full except for Du-Hoi. Can found everywhere to find Du-Hoi, but she couldn't find him. She called him many times but he didn't reply. Can walked sadly along the spot where they had planted a tree before. Du-Hoi promised he would tell Can an important piece of news after the exam, but when Can came, she didn't find Du-Hoi. After 5 years when she came back, she had become a professional photographer. She had been more confident than ever before. Finding her job unsuitable, she decided to give up it. And during that time, Lo Tin-ha arrived at her company and proposed her. It's obvious that Can would reject Lo Tin-ha without even thinking. She wanted to return to her hometown to open her own photography studio, and she could take all styles that she wanted. Without hesitation, the next day Can grabbed her backpack and left. Everything in her hometown had changed a lot. There had been more cars than ever. Her family had moved to a more spacious and beautiful new house. Seeing her back home, his father and Aunt Ha felt very happy. Although they were happy, they didn't forget to remind that it was time for her to tie the knot. She introduced Can to the new director's son, who had just returned from studying in the UK. It seemed gorgeous, but she just only fell for Du-Hoi. After returning to her hometown for a short time, she had a new job. The next day she went to Tran Hoa School to take photos for all students. Coming to school, she met an old friend who was currently a teacher at the school. She also arrived at the office to recall all memories. It was also the most beautiful memories inside every student. Mr. Truong and everyone else couldn't find ways to contact with Du-Hoi. He disappeared like a puff of smoke. Can went back to her old place, reminiscing about her high school days. She opened the old album, remembering the best times of her life. The next day Can obediently went to a blind date as her aunt suggested. Her partner was a man who had already studied abroad in England, but she found him strange and they didn't have the same mindset. Luckily Lo Tin-ha appeared in time and rescued her from that awkward man. Seeing him quite awesome, he asked him to meet her family. Knowing that, his father and Aunt Ha scolded her for having a boyfriend but hiding it. Knowing that she had a lover before, they wouldn't have had to struggle to find her a partner. Although Lo Tin-ha was not young anymore, she was still childish. Hearing him talking nonsense for a while, Can Song's parents were surprised. At this time, the school called to report that Aunt Ha's son was injured by kicking football, and their family rushed to the hospital frightenedly. Lo Tin-ha also followed Can to hospital and stay awake with her family. Since his tiredness, he has fell asleep in the corner. He still held her brother's medical checkup. She asked Lo Tin-ha to drink and thanked him for his help, but what he needed was her feeling. Lo Tin-ha confirmed that he loved her than himself. Just she wanted, he would do everything she preferred to make her comfortable and pleased. The riddle that Can asked her friends to deal with has been answered. The answer was an old building inside the city. She followed the directions to coffee shops filled with trees. Upon coming here, she saw a man sitting next to the window. She thought that it was Du-Hoi, but he wasn't him. And this time was useless for her when finding him. Seeing her like that, he felt angry and frustrated. Lo Tin-ha insisted that if he was alive or not he could find him. The next day he took her to Du-Hoi's house, but he had moved to another location. Lo Tin-ha couldn't understand why Can was finding Du-Hoi hopelessly. If he was alive, he would find ways to meet Can. At that time, he also proposed her again. She didn't tell anything and rest her head on his shoulder for crying. At that time John Donne informed that Du-Hoi had lived with Chu Mat for 4 years. It wasn't until he simply moved to Du-Hoi that he moved to another place. Hearing that, Can burst into tears. She couldn't imagine that he was still alive but didn't contact her just once. However, Can had turned back when he saw Du-Hoi standing in front of him. She didn't say anything, just asked him if he was okay or not. He replied her that everything was okay. His phone rang and it was his father's. Can quickly asked Du-Hoi if he had ever looked for her, even just once. Du-Hoi didn't reply and just walked away. The next morning, he came back to find Can. Du-Hoi wanted to crash at Can's place for a bit. 2 days passed, he was exhausted due to his family issues and his mother was in the hospital. Upon arriving, he reclined on the sofa and slept soundly. She approached him closer and saw the wound that he drew on his hand. Seeing him tattoo that drawing on his arm, she was surprised. They sat and talked to each other until Ken finally leaned in and kissed Do-Hae. It was a romantic kiss like she had waited him for a long time. All letters and messages she sent him, he had received. But she wondered why he didn't announce her that he had got into Tan Hoa University. Why he left her alone. Seeing this, Do-Hae stood up and walked away, leaving her alone. The next morning, he appeared and apologized her. At that same time, Tin-Ha arrived in front of her with a bouquet of flowers. Seeing that, Do-Hae thought that they had been a couple before. Lo Tin-Ha angrily shoved Do-Hae against the wall. Due to him, she had wasted 10 years waiting for him in Beijing. Did you imagine how she had lived in 10 years here? He wanted to beat Do-Hae and taught him but Ken had prevented. Seeing Lo Tin-Ha holding the ring in her hand, Ken put it on her own hand. Knowing that Ken still had something to say, Lo Tin-Ha had taken her outside. In the middle of the road, Ken asked Lo Tin-Ha to stop because she wanted to walk alone. She wandered to the ground where they had planted a tree. Ken sat under the tree and cried loudly. Time had changed but it never changed her love to Do-Hae. Before deciding, she had to listen to her heart. Just doing like that, we would never be regretful. That night, Ken apologized to Lo Tin-Ha. She didn't take his ring since she didn't want to tease him. He stood next to the fountain and repeated his previous action. He threw the armpits of the water gun, causing water to splash everywhere. After that, Tin-Ha came to Ken and stretched out his hand to retrieve his ring. Finally he wanted to kiss her for saying goodbye but she had rejected. He also knew that and then turned around. Unrequited love was worthless for him. The next day Ken came to visit Do-Hae's mother. At that time her condition was so bad. She always blamed himself for making Do-Hae like that. Arriving at the hospital, Do-Hae wanted to talk privately with Ken. In 10 years, he was always finding her and he saw her having a good life. Feeling that he was not worthy, he turned around and left. Only a stupid girl like Ken had been waiting for him for the past 10 years. He felt that he was not suitable for her since Ken had improved a lot. And he felt low self-esteem and did not have courage to face Ken. That night, Ken sent back all the messages she had sent to Do-Hae. After reading, Do-Hae made his own decision. For the past 10 years, he had hidden his feelings. Now she had to find her to write their own loving story. Ken waited for Do-Hae in the open field, and he eventually arrived, just a bit late. Alright, this movie ended here. Please take 3 seconds to subscribe to our channel and support us.